It's 4 o'clock on a Monday. You know what that means. It's time for another exciting episode of Taxi TV Live. Yeah. Woo. And welcome to the big show. Thank you, fake band, fake audience. Let's see the real audience. And there they are. Okay. Ooh, some new names in there. Mary McLean, I've never seen you in there before. Hello, Mary. Gary White. Yeah, I've seen him before. Fuller Music, Bubbles, Mark Doyle. Anyway, I am filling in today. Well, I'm always here, but Ralph Murphy, my dear friend, who is a hit songwriter, hit producer, hit publisher, and former longtime vice president of ASCAP, was supposed to join me today, but then he got sick, so he ended up not flying to Los Angeles in time to do the show. So I hope he gets better, and hopefully I'll see him later on this week. So I decided to do a Ask Michael Anything episode because I haven't done one of those in quite some time. So let's start the episode by doing our usual have a listen to a song, which in this case is a cue, and let's see what we think of it. The cue is called Run for Your Life. Let's have a listen. All right, that was Run for Your Life. Okay, rather short, so I didn't get enough time to write down all my thoughts, but sounded really good. I see that Mr. Fuller has outed himself as the composer on that. So, normally we don't mention names, but more and more people are outing themselves during the show. So what the hell? Not as exciting as maybe Bruce Jenner outing himself, but nonetheless. Anyway, hybrid orchestral, somebody, the title's really good, Run for Your Life. Somebody being chased by dinosaurs. Did I say it was a hybrid orchestral? Yeah, electro orchestral hybrid. Q. Imagine the remake of Journey to the Center of the Earth. It would be great for one of those type of films. Um, could also work well for like a one of the paranormal ghost hunting TV shows, where they run out of the cellar and out into the yard and out into the woods at night running after a ghost. Which, has anybody ever actually seen a ghost on one of those shows? I want to know. Um, at one point, it goes into kind of a breakdown floaty section, and I went, "Oh man, I don't know. That's going to make it tough to use because it's almost another scene, if you will." But then he comes right out of it. And frankly, if that didn't line up with picture, it would be fine because it'd be very easy to just edit that section out, which is one of the hallmarks of a great cue is easy to edit. And I think, Brian, that you could make it after you come out of that, make it even more bigger, more bombastic, more kick the intensity up another notch or two. I wanted to feel it growing, 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 and the crescendo, boom, big ending. But I mean, really, really well done. And I'm just being super picky because I love you guys and I want it to be perfect. So I think that you could make it even more crescendo, make the crescendo more emphatic at the end to make it more intense. But that cue could get used all day long. So great job. Glad you sent it in. Brian says more bigger, yeah. That's what I love about doing the show is I get to show what a complete no, I won't say idiot, but my lack of English skills could be more better as well. Anyway, okay, so today I am going to do Ask Me Anything. And I want to go down the list of stuff that I actually put in the email today because I grabbed those from some emails that have come in from members as well as going on the forum and looking for stuff. So let's start out with, I want to start out with a situation we ran into today that I don't think we've ever run into here at Taxi. And we came up with a solution for it. And the situation was 3 members all sent in the same piece of music for the same submission. Obviously, they were all collaborators. Now, maybe they don't collaborate as much as they should because they should let each other know because all 3 got forwarded. But we can't send the song 3 times, or I think it was an instrumental. We can't send all 3 of them to the listing party. So what we're doing is just forwarding it one time, but sending out a forward notice to all 3 of the members. So probably a good idea anytime that you're submitting something that you collaborated on to check with your collaborators to make sure that they are also not sending it. There you go. Okay, so the first question on the list was, how close do I have to get to what the listing asks for? I saw somebody asking that on the forum. And the answer is pretty darn close. I'm afraid that if I say, yeah, there's a little leeway that people are going to hear, there's a lot of leeway. There's often not a lot of leeway, but it doesn't have to be exactly right on target all the time. It's kind of within the context, my favorite word, of the listing. If a listing asks for cues that are 90 seconds to 2.5 minutes long, and you send in something that's 2 minutes and 42 seconds long, we're still going to forward it in most cases. It would be a rare circumstance that those extra few seconds would keep you out of or prevent you from being forwarded, especially if the piece of music were great. However, the opposite thing would happen if they asked for big, bombastic, cues like the one that Brian sent in today, and what you sent in was incredibly good, but wasn't big enough. It didn't have the action and the forward movement that cue had. We're not going to send it to that music supervisor because they're going to go, "What the hell were you thinking?" If it's a music library and we know the owner really well, which is almost always the case, sometimes we'll hear something that's so amazing but not exactly on target. And we might send it as kind of a one off side forward to them and say, hey, this didn't match what you were looking for, but you should hear this. We thought you might want to have it in your catalog. Now, we're not going to do that all the time because let's say we get, 262 submissions. We might find 14 pieces of music in there that were great, but not on target. So we can't necessarily forward all 14 of them, but if there's something that's so spectacularly good and we know that that library might want to hear it because it sounds like something that they could use, um, we might forward it. We just can't guarantee that that's going to happen. Um, if it's a circumstance where it's a song and the lyric theme needs to be about a particular thing, and the lyric theme that the member sends in is not even in the ballpark with what they're asking for, and there's no way that you could possibly construe that that lyric would work in that circumstance, we're not going to forward it. So you're better off sticking close to what the listing asks for and reading the listing 2 or 3 times and highlight the salient points in the listing. That will help you get closer. Uh, what happens? Here's another question. What happens after my song is forwarded by taxi to the person or company that requested it? All depends on the person or the company. What kind of company? What kind of person? If it's a music supervisor, it's now in their hands, and they're going to listen to it when they have time to listen to it. When they need to listen to it is probably the better answer. We often find that with libraries, sometimes where there are plenty of places that you can see on our forum where people talk about their music was forwarded and maybe 6 months or 9 months or a year or even 2 years. I think we've had a couple of cases where 6 years later, no, that's not true. 6 years after something was forwarded, it finally got a placement. But placement versus getting signed into a library. But oftentimes, libraries are looking for a collection of a certain type of music, a certain genre. And they may run a listing with us. They may have a stash of that same genre on their own. They may be looking from other vendors or resources. And they'll wait until they've got enough of it where they can then publish a collection. They used to do it on CD. Sometimes they still do it on CDs now, but more often than not, they don't. But they wait until they've got enough because they don't want to just put one track out there. So sometimes it could be months until that happens. Sometimes they get backed up, as I've mentioned on other episodes of this show, that they will. Some of the libraries accept music online. Well, they don't have 10 screeners sitting in a room working every 8-hour day. So, generally speaking, a lot of libraries are smallish companies. They're 2 or 3 person companies. And I've also mentioned that sometimes they mention to me that they're 7 months behind in screening stuff. Now, usually when they get stuff from Taxi, it's been forwarded to them for something they are specifically looking for. And more often than not, they get to it pretty quickly, but not 100% of the time. So, got to pull out a prop for this. You know the old saying amongst our members, write, submit, forget, and repeat. Don't sit by the phone waiting to hear. I'm going to go make the air conditioner a little cooler. It's like 90 some degrees outside today, I think, and the wind is blowing like you would not believe here. So it's toasty in here. I'll be right back. Um, Music supervisors, especially if they're working on episodic television, they're usually in a big hurry because they've got a week to crank out the music for the next show and they've got to be ahead of the curve. They can't place it the night before it goes to air. They've got to play it for, pick it, run it by the typically the showrunner, and then get it edited into the show and get it approved so that it's a lock. So that stuff you usually find out pretty quickly. Record labels are a whole different thing. If they're looking for a song in Nashville, they tend to cut songs, 4 records, 4 albums, almost one at a time. They don't like a rock record. They typically go in the studio and do like a month at a time. Maybe they'll spend 3 months working on a record. Maybe they'll spend 6 months working on a record, but they do it in large chunks. In Nashville, they tend to do it 1 or 2 songs at a time. And a lot of times in Nashville, they get down to the wire. They're looking at their release date, and the A&R people, maybe the president of the label, the producer, the manager, the artist, they all get together and go, we should try one more time to find that definitive career-making hit single. So let's put our feelers out one more time, and let's go ahead and book studio time, 10 days from now. So in that case, they're going to turn something around quickly. Other times it's an A&R person. They've got 2 or 3 baby bands that had successful freshman records on the label, and now there's been a 3-year cycle. They're doing their sophomore release, and because they've been on the road and not writing all the time like they did leading up to the first record, their material's not as strong for the second record. So they're kind of looking on an ongoing basis for those acts. And then not until they get down to the wire and realize that they don't have a hit single or a couple hit singles, they'll get pretty panicky and start getting more serious about listening quickly. I saw somebody mention the fire in San Gabriel. Yeah, we could smell it here. I was outside, I think, around noon, and you can definitely smell fire in the air. So, yeah, one of those days. Actually, it's a good thing Ralph Murphy and I didn't. Ralph comes to town every year. He and I go golfing. I only golf twice a year, and it's always on a Monday and a Tuesday with Ralph. And this is the first year we've probably missed in like 10 years together. And I'm kind of glad we didn't go golfing today because the balls would have been going sideways because it's that windy out. Okay, next question on my hit list is, what does lo-fi mean? I see that in a lot of listings, and I'm not entirely sure what that means. Again, context. Lo-fi for record might be a little different than lo-fi for a song for a film or a TV episode. Generally speaking, lo-fi means a very basic, stripped-down recording. It generally doesn't mean that the gear is less good, that the microphones are less good, or that you're using an Alesis ADAT versus a current version of Pro Tools. What it means is that it's stripped down, and if it's appropriate for the type of artist, I always use Tom Waits as my reference, but there are plenty of artists out there that have kind of a gravelly thing going on in their voice. They might be singing, they're a little pitchy, but appropriately pitchy. And I know that that's a hard concept to understand sometimes, but for some artists, they wear it well. The type of song they're doing, the emotion they're conveying tend to work really well with notes that are a little bendy and maybe not right on it. You don't want them to sound like Celine Dion or a cruise ship singer or an American Idol contestant. The vocal would be inappropriate for that kind of song. I swear, if I were still making records today, there would be artists and records that I would pull out, like one of those $100 acoustic guitars that you got when you were a kid, and you didn't change the strings for like 3 years on it. Some of the strings probably even had rust on them. Some songs that I hear today have guitars that sound a little bit out of tune. They sound like the strings are pretty thick, probably a little rusty, and there's not a lot of like silky acoustic, eagly type of acoustic guitar thing going on. The strings sound a little rounder, and I don't mean round as in round, I mean round in their tone. They don't have a lot of top end. There's a little grit to them. And it works well with the vocal, and all that works together in concert with the lyric of the song, the tempo of the song, the melody of the song, the mood and the emotion of the song. You put that all together, and that is lo-fi. That's the best description I can give you. And that same thing could apply for a record. Then again, um, there are other times that you will hear a piano vocal or a guitar vocal, and the guitar does sound incredibly well recorded, and the strings do have a lot of top end, and the vocal isn't gravelly. Maybe it's really up close, intimate. That is also another form of lo-fi. So it's not so much that lo-fi is in the eye of the beholder as it is in context of the piece of music that you're working on. Okay? Um, oh, this is a great one. How can I add air or room sound to my virtual piano? All right. We're getting into engineering speak here. I'm not going to get very technical. And all engineers have different opinions on just about everything. It's kind of like asking, an artist, a painter, um, how do you paint a sunset? But I can tell you my way. This is my opinion, and some techniques that I know that work. How to add air to. There are a lot of great piano samples out there now. Amazing piano samples. First of all, the best thing you can do is pick the right sample for the right application. Again, we're talking context. Let's say that somebody wants light jazz that you would typically hear in the background of an upscale bar restaurant, right? You see a lot of listings for that. There are a lot of scenes on so many TV shows, so many movies have that, husband and wife at a romantic anniversary dinner, or two spies meeting over some issue, at a restaurant. And there's this tinkly little light jazz piano or maybe romantic piano in the background. Well, it is absolutely true that if you're using a sample and it's down low enough in the mix, nobody at home is going to say, oh, I know that piano, that's from XYZ library. Maybe some of you guys might hear it if you got really close to the TV. But if you're the music supervisor and you're sitting there auditioning one after another, you aren't listening on the first pass in context of the mix yet. You're just looking for stuff that you like, that you think is going to work in the context of that scene. So the sonic quality matters a lot at that moment. Now, first and foremost, it has a lot to do with your touch. Okay, somebody with big fat fingers and heavy hands trying to play something light and romantic is going to create a different tone, even if they're using a sample, um, than somebody, a big burly guy with heavy hands is going to create a different kind of tonality and timbre than a woman who's very sensitive and has a lighter touch. Um, so that's point number one. Point number two, and I've heard these samples. I've heard some that are amazingly good, but what they lack is air. So the first thing I would do would be to take out frequencies that you don't need. I would use a high pass filter, which means the highs are allowed to pass and the lows are cut off. And I would use a high pass filter that typically cuts off the low end at a pretty steep curve, somewhere around 100 hertz, so that you get rid of any unnecessary rumble. Um, there tends to be some tubbiness in pianos, and again, this is dependent on the tempo, the heaviness or lightness, the touch of the player, and the octave that the piece is being played in. So you have all these factors that kind of go into it. So there's no absolute prescription. But typically, a good place to start would be to roll off some low mids, probably around 300 to 400 hertz. Just a little bit. Roll off 2, 3, 4 dBs around 3 or 400, probably closer to 400 hertz. I can certainly remember there were many times if I were going for a more strident piano sound, I might roll off a little bit at 400, might roll off a little bit around 7 or 800, which is also a frequency that makes Acoustic and electric guitars sometimes sound a little tubbier, more so with acoustics and electrics than you want. So roll off a little 400, roll off a little 7 or 800. And then if you want to make the piano sound just to hear a little bit more of the attack of the piano, maybe try adding +2 or +3 dBs somewhere around, I'm going to say 1.2K up to maybe 2000 hertz. Just a little touch, and you'll get a little more of the hammers hitting the strings. But then, if you want to add air, and add a little sparkle to the piano, but you got to be careful and not get obnoxious with the knobs. I would say go for like 6K to 7K, somewhere in that range. Sometimes maybe up to 8K, and just add 2 or 3 dB at, let's call it 6,500 hertz. Okay, 6.5K, and that will add some air to it. But we're not done. If you really want to be cool about it, and I'm sure that I am not a master by any stretch of the imagination of using sample libraries, but I imagine that some of them have room mics. I know certainly some of the drum programs do, where you can bring up a pair of stereo faders and they represent room mics. I'm guessing some of the pianos, you guys should tell me in the chat room if that's true or not, but bring up the room mics. That's the thing that I hear most frequently that is a dead giveaway that something is a piano sample versus the real deal. Even though it's a beautiful, meticulously recorded sample, it's missing the air around the piano. So, Scott Hansen, yes, 6,500 hertz, HURTS. Thank you, Scott. Anyway, I used to re-mic things. I was big on doing it with snare drums that just didn't sound all that great. I've been known to do it with other instruments where I send them back out to a pair of speakers in the actual recording room, in the studio, and then set up room mics, maybe something that's like 3 feet away, something 6 feet away, and something that's maybe 20 feet away up in the far corners of the room. And somebody saying McGraw Music says East-West pianos have 3 mic positions. Good to know, because I hear a lot of people not using that if they've got it. Anyway, set up the 3 mic positions like I just described, and play the piano back out in the room and open up stereo faders and just add just a pinch of that back to the sample and get a little bit of the piano bouncing around the room. Now, of course, all this depends on the room that you're using. Is it a bright tiled room with a glass window and maybe sheetrock walls and not much padding? That's going to be a brighter sound. If the room has a carpeted floor and maybe some deadening stuff or diffusers on the wall, it's going to give you a different sound. Here's an idea that I've only seen done once. I didn't actually do it, but I saw somebody else do it, and I thought it was such a great idea. This guy took a piece of 1/8-inch plywood and mounted a pair of, he took the drivers, the speakers, out of a pair of Oratones, and he mounted those. He cut 2 holes. The Oratone speakers, I believe, are 4 inches. So he's got a 4x8 sheet of super thin plywood. And what he did was he suspended the plywood between a couple of stands on bungee cords. Then he cut holes into the plywood, probably 5 feet apart, and he mounted the speakers in the plywood. And then he took the piano and played it out into the studio, into those speakers, and the plywood basically became like a soundboard from the piano. And then he used the 3-foot mic, the 6-foot mic, and the far room mics. And I swear that plywood added a tone, kind of a, I don't know if it was the sound, just resonating within the wood that did it, or if it maybe acted as a reflective plane, but in any case, it sounded really, really, really good. So there you go. There's the Lasco solution to adding air or room to your virtual piano. Okay, what's the difference between a cue and an instrumental track? They're not that far apart, but there are differences. A cue is generally shorter. A cue generally has little to no intro, stays on a central melodic motif, generally has just an A section, sometimes maybe an A and a B section. The A section is typically somewhat akin to like what a chorus would be for a song. It's pretty repetitive, but it keeps from getting boring because every 8 bars, let's say, you add other instruments, other layers of instruments, and then after maybe 32 bars, you drop them out and go back to a pretty basic mix. Then you start building them up again, and then it goes to maybe a crescendo, and then to a buttoned or stinger ending at the end. Um, Now that's different from an instrumental track, which is actually more like a song. It's probably going to be 2.5 minutes to maybe 4 minutes, maybe even a little past 4 minutes. It's probably going to have a little bit longer intro. It's going to have a verse. It could have a pre-chorus. It's going to have a chorus. Could have a bridge. It's going to be constructed more like a song, but it's going to be instrumental. Now, people have been known to, and I've recommended this, take songs that you have and just mute the vocal. And now you've got an instrumental track. But depending on what the other instrumentation is doing, it could end up sounding like a rhythm track that's missing a vocal. Whereas, let's say maybe you have some little guitar cries, or maybe something that's doing like a partial melody. I don't know that I would want you to play the entire melody that the vocal would do, because then it's going to sound like elevator music, but some sort of melody that kind of carries it so it doesn't sound just like a rhythm track. So that is probably a better definition of what an instrumental track is versus a cue. And I hope that makes sense. Okay. Why do some of Taxi listings say that the vocal should be top notch when I'm just pitching my song to another artist? Aren't they going to re-sing it? Yes, they are going to re-sing it. But you want to capture their attention. You want to do everything in your power to make your song appealing to them. So you may have written the greatest song in the world, but if the vocal doesn't help convey what a great song it is, they're not going to get excited and want to record it. So again, there's all the context plays a big role in this. You know, if you're pitching to an artist that has an incredible voice, a lot of vocal chops, big voice, big range, you should have the demo singer be a similar kind of singer. I've mentioned this 1,000 times, and I will keep mentioning it for years to come. If you're pitching for a female artist, it's always a better bet to have a female vocal sing the demo. Sometimes people in the industry will say, I don't care if it's a male or female vocal, as long as the lyric can be made into a masculine lyric or sung from a masculine perspective. I don't care if it goes the other way. But just as a general rule of thumb, match the gender to the vocal. If you can, match the octave, make it an easy octave for almost anybody to sing. If it's somebody that's got an amazing vocal range, start out maybe a little lower to give them some room up top to go to, rather than starting it out in an upper range and not giving them the headroom to hit the high notes with. And then we get into, what about if it's a lo-fi thing, if it's a singer-songwriter thing? A great vocal for a pitch like that might not be somebody who is a great singer. It might not be somebody who's going to hit every note perfectly. Maybe the best thing for that type of song is to have a vocalist that just has so much emotion because they wrote the song, that even though it's a little pitchy, they can get away with it in the context of that lo-fi thing. So it's hard to give an exact prescription, but that's the reason that the vocal that you submit with your songs, and I'm talking about songs you're going to pitch to other artists that ultimately would be for radio and records, you want that vocal to make them go, damn, I need to cut that song. Now, in the context of film and TV, it's not a demo anymore. You're always pitching stuff that they could go to air with the way it is. So you just need to nail it. Um, Benjamin Derclay says, one question about this. What do you do if your demo singer is better than the artist? That happens. I mean, sometimes I hear demo singers that are just so darn good. You can tell they're great singers, but they're not right for the type of song. Just because somebody has a great voice or a great range and can nail a vocal in one or two passes doesn't mean they're right. Um, Sometimes, you know what? If you've got a singer, a demo singer that's better than the artist, it's going to be a turnoff for the artist. They're going to know that if they go out in the room and try and sing that song, that they're not going to be as good as the person singing the demo. You might want to downgrade a little bit. Just saying. Um, Michael, has Taxi given any thought to separating out artist and band listings from song listings? We are in the process, as we speak, of creating a category. We're going to simplify our genres, number one, and this should be something that's happening in the next week or two. We're also going to take anything that is an instrumental request, whether it's a rock instrumental or a pop instrumental or orchestral instrumental, anything that has no vocal is going to fall under the instrumental category. If we start doing, songs for other artists versus songs pitching you as an artist or a band, we learned a lesson a couple of years ago, probably 3 or 4 years ago now. We actually broke up the listings into film and TV and record and radio, figuring that we had two kinds of members. We were wrong. It was amazing how many people said, "Oh, you never have listings in the country category." Well, they were looking under film and TV, and back then, film and TV people didn't look for a lot of country. So we then melded everything back together. But the one thing we're absolutely certain of is that a lot of people are missing instrumental opportunities because they're buried in genres they don't look at. Could be trying to pull one out of the air here, but let's say adult contemporary instrumentals. Um, if you're an instrumental composer for film and TV, you would never go to the adult contemporary section. Therefore, you're going to miss an instrumental listing. So by us throwing everything that's instrumental into the instrumental category, somebody who is adept at doing instrumental stuff, but would never dream of doing adult contemporary because they can't write a lyric, don't want to write a lyric, don't have a good demo singer, whatever the circumstance, they are now going to see that adult contemporary listing. Clarify instrumentals that are wanted, but reference songs are with vocals. Unless we screw up, we always mention the fact that, yes, this, here are three references, and yes, they have vocals, but they want instrumentals that sound like the instrumental tracks in this song. The reason we do that is sometimes we can't find a good example of that type of thing in a purely instrumental form. So we will put up a version with vocals, but we will say right after the references, please do not submit stuff with vocals. We had to run references with vocals because of that reason. Robbie Hancock, Michael, I was just wondering, once you are signed to a few music libraries, how do you know when the libraries you are signed to run listings so we don't submit to those? Frankly, it would be impossible for us. Here's what happens is members will call us up and go, is this listing from that library? Then the person on the phone has to go check it out and they say no. Then the member says, well, is it from this other library? No. Is it from this other library? And sometimes we get the feeling that people are just fishing and hoping that the person on the phone will screw up and tell them which library it is, or they're going through the process of elimination. I can certainly understand why you wouldn't want to submit to a library that you're already in and you've got a connection with that person, whoever the intake person is at the library, whether it's the owner or their head of A&R. However, if you submit through the taxi listing, you got to remember they're looking for that stuff and they are actually waiting to get that stuff in, versus you being one of, let's say, there could be, 100, 200, 300 taxi members that are already in that library. The libraries don't like to spend a lot of time answering emails or phone calls unless they're from people that are looking for music that are going to spend money with them. So if all of a sudden they're getting reached out to by dozens or maybe more taxi members that all say, hey, taxi told me that you guys are running this listing looking for, hybrid orchestral stuff, they're going to get cranky with us, which they do. And they're going to be overwhelmed by the number of people reaching out to them. So I don't have a great answer for you on that. There are times that if somebody calls up that a staff member will tell them, yes, it's this library. We don't love it when they play 20 questions with the taxi staff member trying to figure out which library it is. And the libraries don't love answering emails or getting phone calls. They really don't. I've been spending a little more time lately with library owners, and the one thing they all reiterate over and over again is my time is much better spent pitching. So I don't know what to tell you. Yeah, I can understand. You don't want to waste $5 where you've already got an in with the library. Then again, you may have an in with the library, but if they're looking for a specific thing and they've asked us to find it, maybe that's a more direct in than trying to get them to respond to your email, because you could be one of dozens, if not 100 emails. I get 300 emails a day. Imagine how many emails a library that's got 20,000 tracks and 5,000 composers must get a day. I can't even imagine. I'm trying to get caught up. You guys are hitting me with questions faster than I can answer them. Also, one question, this is Benjamin Derclay again. When writing instrumentals for artist/song listings, how does one make up for the loss of excitement without the vocal? Very often, the music doesn't necessarily change every 4 bars, and is pretty basic to support the voice. However, a taxi member will be returned for a song lacking excitement, even if he's 99% close to the referenced backing tracks. I would have to hear actual examples to be able to agree with you that it's 99% close. Again, this is an example of why I wouldn't just mute a vocal track in a lot of circumstances. There are some where you can get away with it, but there's got to be some sort of movement. You're right, excitement is a good word. Maybe it's by using a similar technique to what you would do for cues, in that you are adding layers every few bars to make the production get bigger, the arrangement get bigger, and add more intensity, and then drop it down, and then build it back up. And always remember, if it's that kind of cue, obviously for like a light acoustic guitar, we're out in a field of flowers kind of cue, it's going to be different than like the cue that we heard from Brian Fuller at the top of the show, which is an action cue, running away from dinosaurs trying to eat you kind of cue. Certainly on those action-oriented cues, you want to create a sense of movement. You want to create a sense of growing intensity, growing fear, growing tension, and it just keeps getting bigger and more intense. Boom! And then there's this big climactic finale, which is the buttoned ending, and it leaves your heart pounding. You've got to be able to do that. You can't just simply take out, again, this doesn't apply to an acoustic guitar, we're out in a field of flowers kind of cue. Everything is so contextual in this industry. Um, okay, you guys are firing them off way fast here. If I submitted a song to a listing and it got returned, I managed to fix the problem after the critique and would like to submit again. Do I have to pay the $5 again? You couldn't submit for that same listing again because that one would have come and gone. You could submit it for other stuff, and yes, you do have to pay the $5 because if you didn't, people want to believe that the $5 is like a moneymaker for us. It's not. If anything, we're lucky if we break even. You got to remember, we're paying the screeners $30 an hour, and the $5 offsets the cost of screeners. Sometimes, in a given month, we might have a little more money come in for submission fees than we pay the screeners. Other months, we pay the screeners more than the submission fees bring in. But the one thing that's been true for 23 years is that $5 fee keeps people from over submitting. We are the one company that doesn't want you to go hog wild and submit everything you've got. And come on, you guys have seen it in the chat room on the show. You've seen it in the forum that members will actually say, yeah, I took a pot shot at that one. The members know it when they do it. Some members do. Other members don't. But the $5, we call it the discouragement fee. It's to keep you from submitting stuff that just shouldn't be submitted. It wastes the screener's time and makes it harder for us to hit deadlines if we're screening a bunch of material that's not on target for the listing. So yes, you would. Okay, oops. Got to go down there. Keith LeBrat says, I thought this was a show on Michael's financial tips. What gives? We can get into financials. Actually, one of the things I'm going to do this year at the 2015 Road Rally, and this was inspired by a band I know called Gooding, Gooding. You probably saw me mention them in the newsletter recently. Gooding is doing what's called a financial literacy tour. They're doing concerts all over the United States at high schools, and I believe they're sponsored by Bank of America. And they do a half-an-hour show, and then they talk to high school kids about saving money and investing money. And that's because, the economy, look, they tell you on the news the economy's bouncing back. Anybody I know that owns a business will tell you the economy hasn't really bounced back. More and more people are going to retire with not enough money because we're living longer. And what are they going to live on? If somebody's got $500,000, let's say, and how many people do you know that have $500,000 in the bank? But let's say it cost you 40 or 50 grand a year to live, and you want to retire at 65 years old. So let's make it 50 grand a year. That it costs you to live. You've got 10 years worth of money, and there's not a whole lot of interest being paid on that money these days. So therefore, you're going to hit 75 years old, and you're going to be out of money, and you're going to be living off of Social Security if it's still around. What are you going to do? Now, if you're 35 years old, and you've got a day job and you're doing instrumental cues on the side and you're making an extra $4,000 or $5,000 a year, let's say you're making $5 grand a year. I'm just trying to make the math easy because I'm not a math whiz. I'm looking around for my calculator. Let's say you make $5 grand a year and you pay 30% taxes on that. This is just your musical income. Forget the fact that you're a computer programmer by day. So you make an extra $5 grand, you net 3,500. Don't go out and buy a bunch of software with it or a bunch of gear that you may not even need. Stick that 3,500 grand in an S&P index fund. Although I am not a financial advisor and giving you actual financial advice. Don't want to get myself in trouble here. But I just saw something, I think Friday, that the S&P index fund hit an all-time high. And I know I've read stuff in financial magazines and on financial websites that you're probably best off just taking your money and sticking it in a mutual fund rather than using a stock picker, just money in mutual funds that follow an index like the S&P 500 tend to do better over time. than people who actually pick particular stocks and do day trading, what have you. So that's what I'm going to do at the Road Rally this year: is get somebody who's actually qualified as opposed to myself, and talk to you guys about, okay, let's say that you're 35 or 40 years old and you're starting to make some money with your music. How much will you have at retirement age if you take that $3,500 a year, and let's say that you make 5% on that money, and it becomes cumulative? So you're making 5% on the 3,500 in year one, and whatever that comes out to be, yeah, I want to say like 36, 3,700, and then the next year you're making 5% on that, compound interest that over time it grows. So I definitely want to talk about it at the Road Rally, and thanks, Keith, for bringing that up, because I had that idea a few days ago and got excited about it. Um, would music once forwarded ever be used without the writer knowing? Is there always a contract first? Um, there should be. Excuse me. Any music library or publisher that would license your music to a TV show or movie or commercial or whatever without first getting a contract with you, signing a contract with you, is asking for big trouble. It puts you in a position of saying, well, I want a lot more money now. It would also ruin them reputationally. We had a case recently, like 2 or 3 weeks ago, where somebody called and said, I'm really happy about this. Heard that my music was on a show or in a promo or whatever. You guys have forwarded it, I think, 3 times, 3 different libraries. We reached out to the libraries, and all the libraries went, I absolutely not. I would never pitch a piece of music without having a contract with the writer. So, no, it wasn't us. Ultimately, my guess is that this band is going, or band artists, whatever they were, is going to find out that 2 or 3 years ago they went to, there are a million of these websites out there now where you can upload your music, and virtually anything, unless it's just really horrible, it goes into their catalog. And sometimes stuff gets picked out of there. And this person probably did an online contract where they clicked submit, and there was a little box next to submit that said, by submitting, you agree to the terms of our deal, and they never bothered to read the deal. And whether they realized it or not, because they weren't careful, their music is now in a catalog, and they have granted somebody the ability, the permission, to act on their behalf and pitch their music. They're not actually pitching it. It's sitting in a database waiting for somebody to stumble by and use it. So there you go. But the answer is, it would extremely rare and probably never happen that your music would be used without you knowing. Now, that said, if you put your music in a library or a catalog, publisher's catalog, um, they can pitch stuff to an entity, whether it's a music supervisor or music editor, what have you, and they may put it on a shelf because they liked it, but it didn't work for that scene on that day. And 6 months later or 6 years later, they end up using it. Sometimes it could be a week later. It goes on the cue sheet. A lot of times, libraries don't know which of their pieces of music got used until they get their BMI, ASCAP, or CSEC statement each quarter. And I'm sure that's true for taxi members that are getting a lot of placements. Sometimes you just don't know until the statement shows up. Oh my gosh, there are so many new questions. Um, Gary White says, I love paying the $5. It makes me work really hard. Robbie Hancock agrees on something with Keith LeBrant that I've now scrolled by. Mark Doyle says dollar cost averaging, Michael. Yeah, he's talking about the financial stuff again. Depending on when you get into a certain fund, it's dollar cost averaging. Um, If a country can't take care of their young and old citizens, they've failed. That's not a question. I just can't figure out what is wanted. I submitted to an orchestral cue and was told it was too pop, question mark, question mark, question mark. I submitted to a country track and was told that no MIDI or electronic instruments are allowed in country. That really blew my mind, seeing what's going on in country today. Honestly, Tune Creator, the smartest thing you can do is before you pitch something to a taxi listing, go onto our forum at forums.taxi.com and go to the peer-to-peer section and say, here's a link to my song, here's the verbiage from the listing, what do you guys think? I'm not a big fan of crowdsourcing. I don't think it's the be-all and end-all that people say it is, but crowdsourcing in the context of finding out if your pitch is a wise pitch in the taxi peer-to-peer forum, I think is a really, really, really good idea. Jay Zakara says an S&P index fund is a good way to go. Looking for questions. I see a lot of comments. Day trading is good, but you have to study the art. Yeah, you know what? People think that it's funny, everybody knows that you should never try day trading unless you've read a lot and experimented and, trial and error and really honed your chops. But yet they think that music is different just because I like the music I make or I want to be creative. Therefore, everybody else should like me. It's the same as becoming a pro golfer, a quarterback in football, or a day trader. You got to pay some dues. It's trial and error. It's making mistakes and learning over time. But you know what? The members that do that always seem to be the ones that are successful. Monkeys have already beat stockbrokers. Musicians don't make music for a pension plan. They make music because they have to and risk poverty in the process. That's true, Nick, but you know what? I believe that anybody that works that long and that hard on the craft of making music should be paid a reasonable income if they're good at it and they've worked that long. Look, a plumber, an electrician, other people who do things that are a trade or a craft, once they've, what's the word I'm looking for? Once they've earned their stripes, not exactly what I was looking for, then they get paid for it. Retire on what I make from Taxi. Wounded Ego asks, yeah, you know what? There are members that go back and look at the passenger profiles probably from like January, February, and March of this year. There are a couple of passenger profiles where the members featured in those profiles. It's in the Taxi Transmitter, the newsletter. And not enough people read that, by the way. But you'll see people that are talking about I'm 50 years old and I'm a computer programmer, and I showed my accountant how much money I'm starting to make from placing stuff in TV shows, and the accountant was overjoyed by the future prospects of my retirement based on that income, which is growing. Thanks, Michael. I'm now crying in a corner, picturing myself in the future eating ramen noodles at 75. Thanks, Keith. That's what I'm trying to stop. I don't want to see anybody do that. Ron Schultz asks, if you sign with a non-exclusive deal with a library, is it possible your music will just sit there? It's possible if you sign with an exclusive library. It's possible if you sign with, a big publisher like BMG or Sony. It's always possible, but it's not necessarily their fault or your fault if it just sits there. It is, have you created something that lines up with somebody else's need at some point in time? It's having the right thing at the right time. That's what makes Taxi's listings so good, is you're not just creating music for the sake of creating music. You're creating music that people actually want. Why do you think people go on dating sites? Because it's a lot more time efficient and probably get a lot better result than going to a bar. Brian Fuller says, I was told to invest in liquid assets, so I bought stock in Jack Daniels. There you go. just to clarify, Michael, what beat per minute ranges are down tempo, mid tempo, and up tempo? You know, we had a staff member that actually not long ago looked at the ranges and gave me actual numbers. I don't remember what they are, quite frankly. I will tell you that there are times where something technically would qualify as mid tempo, but it sounds up tempo because there are eighth notes or 16th notes that are happening, or the way the vocal phrasing is, that it sounds more up tempo than it actually is. So, I mean, there are tons of BPM counters online where you can tap out, put a song on, tap it out with your finger, and it'll tell you what the BPM is. If I were doing radio pop music, which I believe is what, 130 something BPM, I would sit there and tap it out and pick take the three things that are referenced in the taxi listing, see what the BPM is, add them up, divide by three, take the average, and go with that. Buy water and sell it to California. My wife just showed me an article the other day, and I totally believe this about the state that we live in, that California's drought, a lot of the drought is because there's a delta somewhere in California, and a lot of the water is routed so that it runs off into that delta so that it keeps the water level high in the delta because there is a fish that is near extinction, and so they're doing it to protect the fish in that delta rather than using it for humans. It was an article. I didn't go any further than that. Um, all I know is that the Lasco family, yes, we are watering our lawn 3 days a week for half the amount of time we used to. And our lawn, my wife said to me the other day, honey, the lawn is turning brown. Yes, it is. But our governor is Jerry Brown. I don't want him standing in my driveway or knocking on my door saying, you, Lasco, turn your sprinklers off. Michael, when are the producers and music supervisors required to file the cue sheets? You know, I don't honestly know the answer to that. Um, I do know that productions have what are called production binders and post-production binders, and that their production office coordinators and post-production coordinators are responsible for making sure that the binder, it has all that stuff in it by the end of a show and by the end of a season. Um, I can't tell you for absolutely sure that, let's say that an episode airs on Monday night and that the editing is done on Saturday afternoon. I can't tell you with absolute certainty that it is the responsibility of the music coordinator, the music supervisor, probably more like the coordinator, or the post production person, or the editor. In many cases, almost all reality shows don't have music soups now. The editors slug in the music, and they're using the music from hard drives that have 10,000 pieces of music on it, and it's a blanket deal, meaning that a flat fee is paid to the library, and it's an all-you-can-eat situation. And then they file a cue sheet, and let's say that they use 38 pieces of music in an episode, and you've got 3 pieces in there. You get paid proportionally on that. Somehow I have a feeling that a lot of musicians don't make out really well in the blanket deal world. Um, but the bottom line is typically within 6 months, you will see the money show up through your PRO if it's in the United States. If it's outside the United States, it's going to take more like a year for it to go from the foreign PRO to the American PRO to your bank account. Um, Man, you guys are firing off questions faster than I can get to them. Um, Peer-to-peer, peer-to-peer lending works. That's good to know. Yeah, I've heard about peer-to-peer lending, but I'm not doing a financial show. Um, Big Shot Boss wants to know, would you be interested in making an interview with me, Michael? You mean you interviewing me or me interviewing you? Um, Richard Emmett says 10,000 hours, and I'm pretty sure he's referring to that's how much time you need to spend at something to become great at it. And especially, Richard, if you spend the 10,000 hours getting better instead of repeating the same mistakes over and over for 10,000 hours. Um, can a lyricist get a song put into production music libraries even if they don't sing it, or is it only for singers? I'm not entirely sure. If you mean, let's say, Bubbles, that you wrote a song and you had somebody else sing it for you, can that go into the library? Yeah, as long as you paid that singer and they signed a work for hire agreement. I don't think there's a problem with that. Um, Gary White says, "How much for your NS10s, Michael? I sold mine and I shouldn't have." Nope, those NS10s are not going anywhere. Um, Benjamin Derclay, yes, got a lot of questions, Benjamin, but that's good. You learn from that. I've been advised not to try to write trailers as a three-act piece. Instead, I should make one piece, one act, and hope to become one of the three cuts in the final trailer. Any thoughts on that? Yeah, actually, I've given that a lot of thought and I pay a lot of attention. As I've told you guys many times, my wife and I try to go out for movie night once a week. I've seen a ton of trailers, and I would say that lately I've noticed a trend where they are using the same piece. Of course, it depends on the kind of movie. Again, if the trailer is acoustic guitars, boyfriend, girlfriend, falling in love, field of flowers kind of thing, it could be different than uh, an action figure, or not action figure, you know what I mean, a big action trailer. I've noticed that they are tending to use one big piece of orchestral music from top to bottom. Not in every case, but I've noticed an increase of those uses where it's one piece top to bottom and they're using a lot more effects like booms. I don't know what those are called, but bangs, booms, swishes, synthesizer growls, things like that laid in on top during the post production or by the editor cutting the picture. Um, Gosh, you guys are talking a lot about money. Um, how long should the max term be for signing a contract with the music library? Depends on the library. It depends. If it's an instrumental cue that you can make four more of that are all very similar but different, different melody maybe, but similar instruments, go ahead. Sign it with a non exclusive, sign it with an exclusive. I wouldn't worry so much about the term. Look, libraries make a pretty good case for wanting to sign stuff in perpetuity because once they put it out in the world, it's hard for them to take it, call up, 1,000 post houses that have their hard drive with music and say, today I want you to remove these 27 pieces of music. However, some libraries have a clause in their contract that says that if your contract with them ends and you notify them in the prescribed amount of time before the end of the deal, let's say you've got a 3-year reversion, you notify them 90 days before the 3 years is up, I want my copyright back. They will leave your stuff in their catalog, on their drive, distributed wherever they have distributed it. And if it gets a placement, you still agree to compensate them. Um, I don't actually know how that works if you then take that same piece of music and put it in yet another catalog. I would imagine, but I could be wrong, I would imagine that your little lingering deal with Library A is still in effect, and Library B probably, even though you've now taken that song back on your 3-year reversion, put it in Library B, that if Library A gets you a deal, that you can't then collect on, that Library B cannot collect on Library A's thing. I could be wrong about that. Excuse me, getting a frog in my throat. Need to drink something. As a matter of fact, I'm going to warm it up. It's now freezing in here. I will be right back in 10 seconds. I need a remote for my air conditioner. Okay, I definitely need a remote for that air conditioner. I'm telling you, as soon as the sun goes behind that mountain range, it drops about 10 degrees in here. I saw a question earlier about how many BPMs. Man, I'm 10 minutes behind you guys on reading these questions. Russell Landwehr wants to say, I have limited time. I think he means to produce music. Do you think I should focus on feeding the libraries or taking my music or try to expand to other libraries to diversify? Diversify. Absolutely. My opinion is diversify, diversify, diversify. Think of it like the stock market. Are you going to keep putting your money in the same stocks even if they're performing well for you, or aren't you going to diversify into other stocks, or maybe some into real estate, some into muni bonds, whatever? Diversify. All libraries will tell you that they ebb and flow, that they have certain contacts that use them a lot, and then that contact moves on, and now they don't get anything, let's say, from NBC for a while or a certain show for a while. So they all have peaks and valleys, and the more you diversify, the more you're going to see a level, but the more you're going to see steady growth. Whereas, let's say you've got 3 libraries and they love you, and I know it feeds your ego. It makes you feel good that these people keep contacting you, going, "I want more. I want more." It'd be pretty hard to resist that. But now you're in 3 catalogs, and let's say that somebody leaves one of those companies, the pitching person leaves that company, and let's say catalog B or library B falls out of favor with one of their biggest clients, and now they're down. So 2 out of your 3 libraries are down. If you had music in 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 different libraries, it's not going to happen. It's like income cost averaging or investing. Spread your bets. Sorry, I've got a rough fingernail. Just to clarify, Michael, what BPM ranges are down? I don't know. I can't. It's on the internet. I couldn't give you exact numbers. I've been given those numbers, but I didn't commit them to memory. If you want great guitar tracks, practice for 10,000 hours. What does honed mean? Honed means perfecting your skills. Sharpening, yes. Jason Bloom was down to eating dog food before he had a hit. Wrong, Nick. He was eating cat food. Sometimes I think our cat gets better food. Yeah, my wife's a good cook, but that cat food's getting pretty fancy. Scrolling as fast as I can. Is it wise to resubmit a song for a listing when it's already been forwarded but not yet used in an earlier instance? Absolutely. That's a fairly common mistake with taxi members. My song's been forwarded. I'm going to sit by the phone and wait for it to ring to find out if that person's picking it up. Write, submit, forget, repeat. The worst thing that could happen is 2 people are going to want the same song, and then you just create something that's similar for library 2. I'm going to repeat that. The best thing you can do is keep submitting it over and over and over, especially if it's been forwarded for one thing. Now, don't get carried away and think, oh, this is the greatest song ever, so I can be fast and loose and submit it to a lot of different things. But if you see other listings that it's on target for, submit it. The worst that could happen is you have 2 or 3 libraries all asking you for something like it. Mary Band says up around Sacramento, there's a delta. That he must be, or I'm not sure if Mary Band is a man or a woman, quite frankly, but must be talking about the delta where the fish are, that the California water has to go. In my experience, I won't mention the PRO's name, does not honor cue sheets. Um, Somebody right below says use TuneSat. I've you know what there is. It's not a perfect world out there. I know people that have literally taken like a DVD down to the ASCAP or BMI office and say, look, here's my piece of music in this show on this date. Didn't make it to the cue sheet. Um, Island Julie, no, we haven't started marketing the 2015 Road Rally yet. That's why we still have the stuff from 2014 up there. We know where it's going to be and we know when it's going to be. It's going to be November 5th through the 8th. It's going to be in Los Angeles. It's going to be at the place we've always done it before. But it's way too early for us to start taking registrations. This is a great question from Asaf. When the listing says your submission should not sound like MIDI, does that mean use MIDI but be able to fool the user? Yes. Look, if you're doing some form of electro dance music, you want it to be very quantized and dancey and sounding MIDI, but for a rock song or a radio pop song, maybe you don't. If it says don't sound stiff and MIDI like, don't sound stiff and MIDI like. Fool them. Yes, they want to be fooled. The greatest way to fool them is play a couple of live instruments over the MIDI stuff. Play by hand. Michael, would you like me to interview you while we drive in a car drinking coffee? Scott Hansen. I'm clicking along with Michael in the chat screen, kind of like following along in the Bible when the preacher speaks. What is neo-traditional? That's a great question. Neo-traditional, which is often probably most frequently referred to in the country market, means that it's a new artist with a little bit of a new twist that sounds like a traditional artist. So, like George Strait, he tends to lean kind of traditional sounding, but he kind of, neo means new. So like a new twist on a traditional sound. There you go. My gosh, the questions are just rolling in. Brian Fuller wants to know what I think are the top 5 most desirable genres right now for cues and songs. Whew. Doing that off the top of my head, tough. For cues, I would say definitely anything swampy. Swampy, blues rock stuff like Black Keys, always popular. Light, acoustic, positive, whether it's acoustic piano, acoustic guitar, could be solo instrument, could be a small ensemble, but anything that feels very like it would work in a TV commercial under, sheets on the clothesline, blowing in the wind kind of thing. Or my favorite, what's the name of that? Abilify, the antidepressant that you take on top of your antidepressant, but don't take it if you have suicidal thoughts. Dear God. And top 5 genres for songs would be radio pop, radio pop, radio pop. Indie pop and indie rock, also very, very big. And probably... If there's something that I could beg taxi members to do, it would be get over the fact that you're 48 years old and figure out indie pop and indie rock and what makes it indie and do it, because it's not that far away from where you're at. And we have so many listings, great listings that we run, and we don't get enough great stuff in. We don't get enough members getting these deals that are sitting there begging you guys. So figure out what it is. Go listen to some indie pop and indie rock. Spend some time on Hype Machine. Check out music blogs. Last.fm, Spotify, all that stuff. I think we talked about it on last week's show. KCRW, but gosh, just indie pop and indie rock. It's not exactly what you used to do back in the day, but it's not that far away from it, and you can do it. Um, okay, I'm going to scroll down and try and get past a bunch of these to get a little bit caught up. Um, Michael, what's a good number of tracks to have in a library before considering cutting them off from your? I wouldn't cut them off. I would just turn the faucet down a little. You know, you don't want to ever say, "I'm sorry, you've got enough. That's all you can have." You don't want to burn the bridge. Just give them less of your output. And I mean, frankly, um, I don't even know a percentage to tell you, but you know, we see a lot of opportunities that are direct to supervisors that we don't get enough submissions for. And it's because our members, they're so thrilled that libraries are paying attention to them and that they've got an open door with these companies that they've met through Taxi. That it's just like, here, take all my music, take all my music, take all my music. The more stuff I have in the libraries, the better. And there's a lot of truth in that. However, you're giving up half the income. And there are some listings from Taxi where, you know, they're $500 to $2,500 sync fees, and you get to keep all the money, plus you keep 100% of your publishing and your writer share and your master. And, you know, it's tough for me to say keep 10% or 20% or 30% of your stuff where you own all the stuff and don't put it in libraries. But we're seeing probably fewer big money deals out there because there are just less of them, but more of these smaller money deals. And a lot of, you'd be shocked. Some of these listings that we're running from are from huge TV shows. And we just don't get that many submissions because they're asking for stuff that our members don't typically make, like the aforementioned indie pop or indie rock. And we don't want to go out and make every listing we run singer-songwriter or light acoustic instrumental cues. We know that you guys have a ton of that, but at some point you've got to grow beyond what your comfort zone is to create more opportunities for yourselves, right? Um, I hear retitling isn't good for supervisors or libraries. I'm not going to get into that because there are opinions that are valid on both sides of that argument. Um, what's the best way to hide royalty money from your wife? I don't know, Scott. I've never had to do it. I've never paid any royalties. Um, and Russell's absolutely right. The BPM ranges aren't set in stone. You can find numbers that say they're set in stone, but like I said before, and I completely agree with Russell, you could have something that technically falls in a mid-tempo range by the numbers, but because of the cadence or the phrasing that the vocal is delivered with, or a piece of percussion, a tambourine, or a hi-hat, or something about it makes it feel faster than it is. It feels up-tempo. Michael, how many songs does a typical screener screen in an hour? There is no such thing as a typical screener, but I will tell you, like I said before, it's pretty much a break even. So, you know, do the math. I guess it works out to about 6 an hour. But it's so misleading to say that because here's how some screeners work and how other screeners work. Some screeners will listen to the song all the way through. I'll walk by and I'll see them sitting there, their headphones on with their eyes shut. Sometimes you'll see them with their hands holding the headphones up, you know, really tight against their ears. And they're sitting there and they're listening. Then they'll go back to the top and start listening again and doing their comments. Other people are really good at, in the moment, putting down their comments. By the time they get to the end of it, they've got probably, I don't know, 60, 70, 80% of what they want to say down. Then they'll go back if there's a problem section or something in particular they want to point out, they'll go back to it. So there is no real typical. Um, this is an easy one. What microphone would be good to buy for a home studio? Um, you know, two microphones I can recommend with absolute certainty, but I want to do full disclosure on one of them. One of them, which is I think $150, and other people in the chat room will back me up on this. One of my dearest friends in the world is a guy named Rob Shirelli, and he owns a company called Gage Precision Instruments, and they make the Gage ECM 87, which is, I mean, at any price, it's a great sounding microphone, but for $150, it's a steal. Um, it's just a great overall microphone that's inexpensive as hell. Another great microphone that is also an interface, an A to D interface with a built-in microphone, is the Apogee One. I cannot say enough good stuff about it. The microphone that's in there was tuned by Bob Clearmountain, who, for my money, is one of the greatest engineers and mixers in our lifetimes. And Bob and his wife own Apogee, and I've got an Apogee One at home that my daughter Hannah has used. I've played around with it. The thing sounds like, $1,000 to $3,000 microphone, and I think the Apogee One is somewhere around 250, $300. You can plug a bass into it. You can plug a keyboard into it. You can take a headphone feed out of it, and you can use the microphone, or you can plug another mic into it. Sounds great. So there you go. Gage ECM 87. And every one of those, by the way, is ear tested by Shirelli or his partner, Chandler Bridges, before it goes out to the buyer. An AKG C214, I used one of those many years ago and was shocked how good that sounded. Rob Spencer says, just picked up the Apogee One for iOS and Mac. Built-in microphone is crazy good. I agree. Oh, wow, we're almost done. Thank you, Michael. Great information. Got to go teach music. You're welcome. Okay, I'm going to take a few more before we wrap this up. Yeah, anything in response to the earlier question about what is good for cues, anything indie, that's where the market is. You know what? Follow what the kids are listening to, whether it's top 40 radio pop, whether it's indie pop or indie rock. Music is a fashion, okay? All of you who are men who are married will tell you that women own a lot of shoes, typically. Not all women. I'm making a gross generalization. Please don't send me any nasty letters, ladies. But women tend to like shoes a lot. They won't wear shoes that are 3 or 4 years old, generally speaking. Fashions change. Except I wear shirts that are 20 years old. I really do. Most of my shirts are at least 10 years old. I rarely buy clothes. My wife will tell you I buy like one new shirt a year and like 2 pairs of new Levi's. I'm pretty basic when it comes to clothing. But fashions change. So music changes. It's a style, and it's ever evolving. And if you're going to stay stuck at what you love from 20 or 30 years ago, you can't expect the marketplace to love you. And I've been begging our members for 23 years, stay current. It's not that hard. Get out of your comfort zone. Our most successful members, almost to the person, will tell you that the reason that they've become successful is they thought that this is what they did best. I do rock. And they tried to make a little hip hop thing, and they went, holy crap, that wasn't as hard as I thought. Oh, look at that. A library picked it up. Holy crap again. A library got it placed 10 times in reality TV. I know. I'm going to start doing a lot of hip hop instrumental cues. Lo and behold, now they're making a 6-figure income. That's the way it goes. Richard Emmett says, besides peer-to-peer, I highly recommend custom critiques from Taxi. They've been very helpful. Thank you for saying that, Richard. I can always count on you for reminding me of all the things that I forget. scrolling down. Man, I am so far. There's 327 new posts. What headphones do the screeners use? They use very middle of the road Sony headphones. Um, I can't give you the exact number off the top of my head, but if you call the staff, they'll go look at a pair. They're not great sounding. They're not bad sounding. They're just okay. Same ones you see the screeners using, or the one-to-one mentors at the road rally. Um, Obviously, if we have headphones that are like audiophile headphones, they're going to make stuff sound too pretty. If we have really bad sounding headphones, not going to work. So we picked middle of the road. Not to mention the fact we had a problem years ago when we did have a bunch of really good headphones with, let's just say they disappeared at the end of a lot of screener days. um, when submitting music, should they be mastered as loud as possible, or is it more desirable to leave some headroom in? I'm a fan of not over compressing stuff, but I think I stand in the minority on that. Make it reasonably loud. It's pretty obvious when I do listening on the shows where we're listening to stuff and we get, one thing and it's at a reasonably good level, next thing reasonably good level, and then I pull out a third piece of music and it's way down. I've been told, and I absolutely believe this to be true, that a music supervisor or an A&R person or whomever is on the buying end, the receiving end of music. If they hear loud, way down, bad. So on a scale of 1 to 10, make it a 7 or an 8, and you're safe. That way it's loud enough, but not to the point of being obnoxious. I can't believe it's 5:32. Please explain an open door with libraries. How often can you send them music? Do they give you a time frame or amount of music you can send? Every library is different, Danny. You know what? Again, I don't want this to come out wrong. Musicians tend to only think of themselves. It's me. It's all about me. And I don't mean that in an egotistical way. They are self-centric. They think about library over there, my music over here. What do I have to do to get them more music? In the case of some libraries, you're going to be pissing them off because you're reaching out to them too frequently. And that's the thing, as soon as somebody shows you a little love and gives you some attention, it's like a member of the opposite sex, making goo-goo eyes at you or indicating that it might turn into a romantic evening, whatever the scenario is. People tend to, I was going to say jump on that, but that would have been a bad choice of words. You know what I'm saying. People get very excited when other people that they want to have pay attention to them actually do. Frequently, that causes people to make really poor decisions, as in being too clingy. Right? Nobody likes somebody clingy. Well, if you have a library that taxi forwards some of your music to, and you are all over them about, hey, you want to check this out that I did? Want to check that out that I did? Plus, I know a really good friend that I met at the road rally. You should check out their music too. Remember the story I told you not that long ago about the library owner that I had lunch with, was on the phone with, somebody that I'm pretty close to, very close to. And he told me, I asked him, where do you get your music that doesn't come through taxi? And he said, I've never really thought about it, but a lot of it comes from people, composers and artists that are already in my catalog, referring other people to me. And I said, oh, so that's cool. They know where the bar is set. So obviously the music you get recommended or referred by them is really good. And he goes, gosh, I never thought about it, but like 90% of it isn't. Only 10% of it is usable. And it was like quite a revelatory moment for that guy and myself. So 90% of what he gets that's referred by people that are already in his catalog, sending their friends over, 10% of it is good, 90% of it isn't good enough. So that pisses away a lot of their time spent listening to music. It's probably not bad or horrible, but it's not right or it's not good enough. So again, would you rather have them spend that time listening to your friend's music that's not right and not good enough 90% of the time, or would you rather have them pitching your music with that time that they've just spent on that other music? Now, I know Taxi and its members are famous for being incredibly generous with their time, with their knowledge, with their skills, and with their connections, right? People turning, I'll turn you on to this library owner if you turn me on to that library owner. But there is a downside to it. And I don't want to be Mr. Stick in the Mud about this, but I was thinking about this yesterday, on Sunday, mind you. There's a downside. For every minute they spend checking out music that you're referring to them, that's less time they are spending picking up the phone, calling Music Soups on other shows, or pitching your music. So find a balance. Balance in everything makes life good. All right, I'm going to do 2 more questions, then we're calling it a night. This isn't a question, but somebody's mentioning ukuleles with snaps and claps isn't hard to get loud. You know what? In answer to somebody's question earlier, you would think the whole ukulele thing, the simple little ukulele track with finger snaps, whistling, glockenspiel, foot stomps, whatever, would be over, but it hasn't. So there you go. I'm going to end the show. We're an hour and 36 minutes into the show, and my voice is getting hoarse. I've answered a lot of questions, and I just scrolled down. I will answer one last question because this is a good one. I'm such a sucker. Michael, do any of your customers, soups or producers, ever ask for a limited number of forwards to them from Taxi for any given listing? For example, maybe a screener would normally forward 10 out of 100 songs, but the customer only wants 5. If the screener would have to pick the best ones, does that ever happen? It does happen, but it's extremely rare. It's extremely rare. And frankly, we don't tell the screener you can only find 5 because we don't want them to work through that mindset or that lens. If they forward 10 and the music supervisor said he or she only wanted 5 or the library only wanted 5, what we're more likely to do is we will have one of our senior staffers who is an expert on that kind of music, or maybe sometimes me, pick the best 5 of those 10. But you got to remember the other 5 are also over the bar and on target. So I think it's really hard. But sometimes what we'll do is pick the best 5 of the 10 and send those off, and then follow up with an email a day or 2 later and say, by the way, there were 5 others that also got picked. We think you might want to hear them. Can we send them over? I don't think anybody's ever said no to that. We just had a case recently where we had 143 things forwarded out of 300 and change submissions. We didn't want to freak out the music editor on the other end, so we broke it up into 3 batches of roughly 50 apiece and sent them out like 1 a week for 3 weeks because there wasn't a lot of time pressure on that listing. So there you go. Thank you for watching, you guys. I hope I got to many of your questions. I know I didn't get to all of them, but I tried. I will see you next week. I believe that Taxi member Richard Dance is going to be in Los Angeles next week. He did the show with me probably about 9 months ago, and I really loved having him here. He's a great guy. We went out to dinner afterwards. We could definitely do a road trip together. Anyway, Richard Dance, he was the guy that was lucky enough to be standing next to a library owner in line at the road rally and got some crazy amount of stuff picked up, like maybe 115 things just by being at the right place at the right time and having the right music for it. So he's going to be here, and we're going to get an update from him and find out what's transpired in the 9 months, because he's gotten stuff into a lot of different libraries, and he's made a lot of, he's a good business guy. He's into real estate, and he's got a really good business head, even though he comes across as just like a regular old laid-back musician dude. He's an awesome guitar player, has a great business head, and he's made some strategic observations about how to get ahead in the industry. So I can't wait to have him back here. And that's it for me. See you guys next week for another exciting episode of Taxi TV Live. Bye-bye, you guys.